Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club of California's Southern California program titled LA Painter, The City I Know, The City I See. And thank you for joining us here at Pasadena Heritage's beautiful and historic Blinn House. We love coming down once a month to Southern California and doing our programs here, and we're so happy you could join us. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the Executive Director for the Book Club of California. It's my pleasure to welcome you and kind of host this evening's program. So for those of you who might be new to us, the Book Club of California is a nonprofit, member, and donor-supported organization that is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes we do that with a particular focus on the history and the literature of California and the West. The book club publishes limited edition books, a scholarly journal. There's a copy on your table if you're interested. It's called the Quarterly Newsletter. We also host exhibitions and programs like the one this evening on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, history, and much, much more. So if you're not a member of the book club, or if your membership has lapsed and you're interested in what we do, please consider joining our century-long tradition. We simply can't do the work of the book club without our members and our supporters. So you can visit us online at bccbooks.org to join or to donate or to find out more about the book club. I've also put some membership information brochures around the room on the table, so you're more than welcome to take one of those as well and learn more about us. And now for tonight's program and our presenter. The program is titled LA Painter, The City I Know, The City I See, and our speaker is Karla Klarin. Karla Klarin was born in Los Angeles' San Fernando Valley, was schooled in the Valley, and in Italy. She earned her BFA at San Francisco Art Institute and her MFA at Otis Art Institute. Her work is included in the collections of the Hammer Museum, LACMA, the Frederick R. Weissman Art Foundation, and Fisher Art Museum, among many others, as well as in numerous private collections. LA Painter, The City I Know, The City I See, is a full-color exploration of Karla Klarin's abstract and modern landscapes of Los Angeles, the place she was born, raised, and became one of the city's most influential female painters. The book is the first full monograph of her work, and it is accompanied by 10 essays that define her hometown, a city of moving parts and people that exist within a geometry of impressive expanse and beauty. So tonight, Karla's going to be talking about and reading some of the essays from the book. If you have any questions for our speaker, please wait until the end of the presentation. I'll come back up and we'll have a little bit Q&A. We'll certainly have time to do that. We also have copies of the book available for sale in the back of the room. If you're interested in one of those, we'd love for you to buy a copy of the book. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Karla Klarin.
Lower this. I'm one of the little people. I'm going to read two essays. One is about my mentor and a very important painter in San Francisco, and how he influenced me. And the other one is about an influence I had in the San Fernando Valley when I was a little girl. And because I was born in LA, I was born downtown LA, what used to be Queen of Angels Hospital, if anybody here remembers that. You were born in Queen of Angels? Hey, sisterhood. You too? Oh man, you know, I was in Echo Park, and it's long gone. But I mostly grew up in the Valley in the 50s and 60s when the Valley was just, being developed, and spent a few years in Italy. My family, my mother, my grandparents were from Italy, And we lived there for a few years when I was growing up. And then came back and went back to the valley until I could escape. And I do have an essay in the book, but I won't read it tonight, called Escape from the Valley. But before I read the essay, it's titled Sam Chicalian. Can everybody hear me? Okay. I just want to set the stage by, so to speak. I don't know, you're all aware of the Stephen Sondheim celebration going on around LA. Yeah, because twice I've been to the Pasadena Playhouse to see Sunday in the Park with George, and then a couple weeks ago I saw a little night music, and I'm going to see Into the Woods in July. I'm a huge Sondheim fan. But what struck me when I went to a little night music a couple weeks ago was I had like a transcendental experience when I was watching that play. And I felt that I was part of what was going on. I didn't feel like I was in the audience. I somehow was so immersed in it and so overtaken by the beauty of the music and the acting that I felt like I was there on the stage. And it was just a moment where I just kind of went, oh, you know, where you just, oh my God, this is what I live for, you know. And when I came home, I was telling my husband, and he was like, well, you know, he sort of, you know, wants to go see the Rolling Stones, right? He doesn't really get Sondheim. And, but I had this realization the next day. I was thinking, that's why I paint, you know, to feel what I felt when I was watching the Sondheim musical. You know, the beauty of it was just overwhelming. It was so beautiful. And when the actor was on stage, she began to sing Send in the Clowns. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that. I mean, it's his most famous song. I felt chills go up my back. It was so beautiful. And that's why I paint. And those moments don't happen often, but they happen often enough to keep us going, right? Not just if you're an artist, but if you love art, if you love any of the arts, that's why we love them, you know. And so let me read. Are any of you from the Bay Area? Are any of you? Oh, Kevin. Okay. Okay. Well, I went to art school in 1972 to San Francisco Art Institute, which is kind of between North Beach and Russian Hill, and it closed a year ago, permanently. After 150 years, it closed. But I was lucky enough, 50 years ago, to go up there, and I went up there to study photography, and I switched to painting, and my life changed. So I'm going to read about my time at the Art Institute 50 years ago. And it's not that long, so don't worry. Okay. The title is Sam Chicalian. The quote at the beginning is, "It's about the painting. It's not about you." That's Sam. He died in 2004. I don't know who I would be today if I hadn't known Sam Chicalian. I do know that I wouldn't be the me that I am now. I learned about painting from Sam, but through him I also found me, the painter. I spent 32 years calling and visiting him until his death in 2004. And all these years later, I still miss hearing his voice. "Karla Klarin, what are you doing? Are you painting? Are you painting?" And then sometimes he would add, "You dummy." I picture Sam and I see his not very tall, barrel-shaped body hurtling forward. His bald pate with its dark red fringe is tilted to one side, and his black eyes are totally focused on whatever is in front of him. He rarely looked me in the eye when we talked. Sam was intensely there, but just as intensely, he was somewhere else. Where, you ask? I don't know. Today, although I know he most definitely is somewhere else, he is still here with me when I need him. I can summon his voice when I paint. "Klarin, get out of the way. Let the painting be what the painting wants to be." More important to me than his words were his core beliefs that painting matters, and that it is important to paint very, very well. As Sam so often reiterated, to do that, you first and always have to get out of your own way. Clearly not simple. In September 1972, when I moved north to attend San Francisco Art Institute, the 1967 Summer of Love was long over. Left behind in Haight-Ashbury were discarded remains of broken youth and wilted flower power. The streets were sad repositories for those who had turned on, tuned in, and were strung out. The city was shabby, cheap, and had soul. San Francisco was still the best place for a 19-year-old fleeing suburbia, and I loved it. At some point during my first semester, I called home. And found the phone disconnected. I called my neighbor to find out what was going on. She said, "Karla, your parents sold the house and moved out." That is a true story. Nobody can believe it, but it's true. It gives you a little sense of what I grew up with, okay? And I don't know how many of you are Italian American, but my mother was, she was a handful. She didn't know where they were. My parents had broken up and gone their separate ways. Instead of worrying why they didn't tell me, I breathed a sigh of relief. The valley was even farther behind me. My home was now wherever I was, and for the moment, that was San Francisco. I started school as a photography major, but it was soon clear I couldn't spend my life in a darkroom. I headed down the large ramp from the old buildings to the new high-ceilinged painting studios. In the open, light-filled mess of those studios hummed an electric current of youthful enthusiasm. We dripped through, dabbed, and sprayed paint at anything that got in our way. We quickly absorbed the Bay Area ethos. But paint was not just a vehicle for color. Paint was a physical form in itself. One day, Wayne Thibault came from Davis, 70 miles east of San Francisco, to talk to a small group of us. He sat calmly in a gray suit and white shirt and spoke about his work. On Thibault's canvases, the lusciously beautiful oil paint looked as edible as the pastries he painted. Thibault and Chicalian were both committed to a sensuous use of paint over their whole painting lives, a quality common to many Bay Area painters. Yet one painted items as delicate as cupcakes and other painted large, sometimes even aggressive color abstractions. In person, Thibault was reserved and gracious, and Sam was neither. He was gruff and blunt. SFAI exposed us to everything. Each morning, the clusters of easels, beat-up chairs, and pallet tables were claimed and arranged into private spaces. Over the course of the day, these mini studios formed and reformed, depending on the needs of the latest claimant. Music, jazz, or rock poured from a battered radio. This is where I had my first Sam experience. While I was sitting on a beat-to-shit, paint-encrusted chair contemplating black and white tempers I'd painted on cheap brown butcher paper, Sam passed me, wiggled his hands at my painting, and said, "Yeah, you got something going on there." Not long after that brief encounter, I was standing behind him in line in the cafeteria. I hadn't actually met him or taken his class. Out of nowhere, Sam reached around and grabbed my crotch. No words, no eye contact, just the grab. My instincts kicked in, and I grabbed his crotch in return. He jumped back, shocked. Had no one ever stood up to him before? He was a legend at SFAI, considered the most important painting instructor in San Francisco. I enrolled in his class despite his appalling behavior. I was still a kid, and I chose to move past his despicable act. At the time, I was determined to do everything I could to become a very good painter. If Sam was the best painting teacher at the school, I was determined to study with him, no matter what. I have to remind myself that in 1973, attitudes were different. Offenses against girls and women were common. They were overlooked. I realize now that Sam had unintentionally reinforced the lesson I learned growing up in a violent household. As a female, I'd have to stand up for myself and my work and conquer obstacles that were in my way, or I would have to accept defeat. No way was I going to be defeated. With few female role models in the art world and almost no teachers who were women, taking Sam's class seemed like my best way forward, and I made the right decision. By studying with Sam, I learned about painting in ways I might never have otherwise. Sam never bothered me again, but I was left with a conundrum that still confounds me. As a woman and a painter, how can I reconcile the ill treatment of women by some well-known male artists with the importance of the art canon? Our history is littered with men who mistreated women. Do we deny their existence? While knowledge of their ugly history often taints my reaction to their work, one of the mysteries of art is that it can be important and beautiful despite or in spite of who created it. Who can imagine modern art without Picasso, without his Guernica? A man known to have been cruel to women throughout his life painted one of the world's most powerful paintings about human suffering. Sam often would riff on why a work of art is more than just a nice picture. There are comfort paintings and there are paintings that are challenging. Without fully understanding what he meant by comfort paintings, I knew I didn't want to make them. I didn't want to live a comfortable life in the valley. So why would I want to make comfort paintings? He always stressed the importance of clarity. When a painting works, he taught us, it has an inner logic, an integrity, and intelligence that allows it to stand on its own, apart from the human who created it. Sam wanted us to understand that it's about the painting. It's not about you. Over time, I learned not to impose my needs or wants on my paintings. I detached myself and I listened with my eyes to what the painting is telling me. Paintings, like people, need space to become what they need to become. Sam wandered around the studio as we dabbed, splashed, or threw paint, and he'd toss out elliptical comments about film sports or shows he'd seen on a recent trip to New York. He rarely stood and discussed what we were painting. He didn't pretend there was a program we could follow to become good painters. Sam knew that teaching students to paint is impossible, because painters learn to paint only by painting. He also knew that very few of us would continue on to become painters. He goaded us into looking at what was in front of us. He wasn't teaching us to paint. He was teaching us to see. One day in Sam's class, everything shifted into gear for me. Because I drew quickly, I was bored with drawing and painting again and again the nude model that was posing for the class. My attention drifted to the pencils scattered every which way on my table. So I sketched one, then another, and another. Sam came up behind me and barked, "Pencils! Draw the effing Klarin! Pencils, Klarin!" For the next 2 years, he hounded me to draw and paint pencils, so I did. I drew pencils, painted pencils, and even built giant pencils out of cardboard until I graduated, and then for 2 more years after that. Only recently did I understand why Sam pushed me to stick with those pencils. Sam saw in my pencil drawings. He saw that with those straight lines and angles, I was instinctively drawing space and geometry. Over the decades that have followed the day when he told me to draw the pencils, I've essentially continued to create pencils as I construct and paint the buildings and landscapes of LA. I've used space with its attendant geometry in my work since that long ago day in Sam's class when I lost interest in the human body and turned to the simple pencil. Going to SFAI and meeting Sam qualify as karmic events. Somehow, inside the restless girl in the baked streets of the valley was a compass that guided her north at exactly the right time, like when constellations line up in the sky. I showed up for my first day of art school as a valley girl. But when I left, it was someone else, a painter. That's my Sam essay. And, it's interesting how, I don't know how many of you have had mentors or people who've changed your life, but, I don't know. A while back, because I have 6 years of art school, a year getting a teaching credential, 13 years of public school, so that's a lot of education. And I can only think of 2 teachers who changed my life. I mean, literally changed my life. So a teacher becomes a mentor who affects a young person is invaluable. And Sam, I still miss him. When I got the phone call that he died almost 20 years ago, I cried for several years when I would think about him. I just missed him so much. And I'm looking for the next essay. And what do they do? What does a mentor, what does somebody like that do? What do they, it's something, it isn't something you can teach somebody to be a good teacher. It's like they have an ability to connect and communicate that is inside of them, And I was lucky. I met Sam. The next essay is about an episode in my childhood in the San Fernando Valley in the 50s. And I don't know how many of you are from LA. Few of us. So you know what LA was like, in the 50s and the 60s. It was a very different place. And the valley was very new. When my parents bought their house in 1951, Van Nuys was like the very beginning of the suburban sprawl that the valley became. Anyway, Natalie's house. And it's a quote from my dear friend of mine. To be born in SoCal is to be born into a sensual life. And my friend John Arganides, whose quote this is, was born in Pasadena, grew up in Pasadena. His father was one of the resident actors at the Pasadena Playhouse for many, many years. John grew up at he's almost 80 now, grew up at the Pasadena Playhouse, hanging around, backstage. A lot of memories. Not long ago, I drove by my childhood home in Van Nuys for the first time in more than 50 years. A small house my parents had bought in 1951 for $10,000 survived 70 years and a couple of earthquakes, but there's not even a big shade tree to ease its current occupants through the valley's blistering hot summer months. The memories of Mary Ellen Avenue I held on to for so many years started to dissipate. I was suddenly faced with recognition and loss. But one memory, a memory that has followed me through life and onto my canvases, remains. A half dozen doors south of our house, I found a pink stucco box that belonged to Natalia and Marindo Almeida. It has fared better than ours. An angled carport now provides shade over its driveway, and the place looks clean and compact. A fledgling pepper tree stands in its otherwise empty front yard. As I circled the block, I noticed that many of the properties had very little plant life. There isn't much about these plain little structures and their minimal vegetation to indicate that decades earlier they were beehives of family life. Our tiny stucco houses lined the empty streets we boomers took over by day, running, yelling, laughing, kicking balls, and riding our shiny bikes into cul-de-sacs. We called them keyholes, pedaling around, furiously around and out, only to spin around in another keyhole, and then yes, do it again. Each small house had a backyard, and ours was filled with sand, rocks, and a cactus mound my water-conscious father had planted. Our family pet was Teddy, a desert tortoise Dad had brought back home from one of his surveying jobs. I fed Teddy iceberg lettuce discarded by a local market, and he munched happily without a care that it was rejected produce. After a few years of lettuce, Teddy tunneled under the cactus mound and likely continued his life in someone else's yard. Or perhaps he dug his way into the Wash, a tributary of the usually dry LA River that ran behind our house. I never saw Teddy again. Everything about the valley was like Teddy. Here today, no guarantees about tomorrow. Nothing was built to last or cohere. Little thought had been given to organizing these spread out neighborhoods around central parks or piazzas. Real estate that could be developed wasn't wasted on such things. Streets and avenues were simply lines that divided land for maximum profit. Houses and schools were built for the practical purpose of sustaining the families of employees who worked at the burgeoning aerospace and auto manufacturing sites in the valley. Beyond that, we were on our own, not unlike Teddy. Van Nuys was one of the first valley subdivisions built after World War II, and it set the tone for all the local housing tracts that followed. Backyards backing up to backyards, driveways abutting driveways next door. Our small houses were individuated only by color, usually earth tones, or in a few cases, pastels. This brings me back to Natalie's house. It was a time without luxury or the indulgence of a personal aesthetic. That is, except for the house that belonged to the Almeidas. Natalie was Portuguese and had been a ballerina. Lourindo was the Brazilian jazz and classical guitarist. He was extremely famous. I don't know if you've heard of him. They were a quiet, childless couple. My mother called her Natalie, small and dark-haired, like Mom. Natalie was home alone a lot. I saw her only now and then in her front yard. I remember Natalie because of her house, which was painted carnation pink with a white rock roof, so common at the time, finished with white fascia boards. Her yard was sectioned into geometric shapes, each filled alternately with white rock or black volcanic rock. The driveway was painted black. No plants. The overall effect, pink and black. I was too young to know that Natalie was a modernist. Now, when I picture her house and yard, I envision a complete composition. In the midst of 1950s conformist suburbia, she had created a Mondrian-esque sculpture defined by a crisp, minimalist aesthetic. Natalie didn't install a New England yard with a green lawn and roses in this desert environment, the way other homeowners had done. Her pink, black, and white palette set Natalie's house apart from every other house in the neighborhood. Hers was a distinctly Southern California tableau. Natalie painted her home this delicate pink for a reason, and she surrounded it with hard-edged black and white geometry for a reason. Because she died many decades ago, I can't help but overlay my own interpretations. To me, her choice of carnation pink asserted her femaleness, not femininity. Female is about the person, while femininity is about attributes. The sharp geometry of her rock garden spoke to the unforgiving world that surrounded her, and my nascent female self connected with that. As a small child, I was intimidated by the surrounding hardscape of houses, streets, and freeways, all so cold and so practical. The pink inner me understood and wanted the pink oasis. When I painted the first Natalie's house in 2014 in my series, I didn't think of the pink house as a feminine symbol. I still don't. It isn't a symbol. It's a reality, our female reality. And of all the paintings I've made in my life, it's easiest for me to see me in the Natalie's House series. In the past, I never emphasized or thought of myself as a female painter. For years, I struggled to navigate in an art world based on the primacy of male artists. The art business and the greater world beyond it may struggle to catch up with female sensibilities, but I know that who I am and what I paint is inextricably tied to the wonderful reality that I am female. I can know that I am a painter and also a woman. Two separate facts, no qualms. Painting Natalie's house freed me. I've carried Natalie's aesthetic with me ever since I left Mary Ellen Avenue. It has influenced how I see things, how I interpret things, and how I recall things. In 1963, and all these years later, what I remember most about President Kennedy's assassination is Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy's pink suit. The same shade as Natalie's house, stained black in splotches with her husband's dried blood. Now when I paint a pale pink sky over the erupting angles of the LA landscape, or a pink house snuggled between two colorless neighboring houses, I know that I'm painting that pink for the little girl who lived down the street from Natalie. The Portuguese ballerina's house is part of me, still. So, do we have any questions, any observations, any thoughts you want to share? Yeah.
Actually, it's more a technical question.
Sure.
Are all of these images we have seen all paintings, or some of them prints?
They are all paintings. They're all oil paintings.
Oil paintings, okay.
And they are mostly very large. Like this one's probably, that one's not very big, but usually 7, 8 feet. Some are more like 9 feet.
Oh, wow.
The one on the cover, I think, is 8 feet by 4 feet. So I love making.
On canvas, not board.
They're on canvas, most of them. Well, initially, when I first started exhibiting in 1980, I had my first show in 1980. My earliest paintings were constructions. They were on the wall, but they were constructed out of cardboard, and they were three-dimensional. So they were kind of like this one, or this one. You see the angle here, and the tree I made. This one also, angles. It's sort of, could be like this deep, and it goes in and out.
Wow.
And like this one also. This is all, and this one also is angles like this deep. But for the most part, like that one is 4 by 8 feet, and that one is all built out. That blue one you just saw with the objects on the table, I talk about it a little bit in one of the essays when I was, that's from 1983 maybe, and in 1982 I got an award, I'm trying to remember, I got an 1982. I got an award from LACMA, the LA County Museum of Art. They called it the Young Talent Award, and they gave out 2 every year. And they gave me that award in 1982, and they gave me $3,000. So I was like, wow, when I was 29 years old or whatever, it was like $3,000. So I was living downtown LA in a loft. I'd been down there since 1975. And I went to Peru for 6 weeks with my $3,000. And I stayed in, I don't know if any of you have been to Peru, but that's where Machu Picchu is. And I had seen a lot of the sites in Mexico, Chichen Itza and Palenque, and I traveled around Mexico a few times, going to the different Mayan and Aztec ruins of Teotihuacan, and I wanted to see Machu Picchu in Peru, so I went to Peru for 6 weeks. And to get to Machu Picchu, which is up in the Andes, you go to a town called Cusco. And I stayed in Cusco for a week. I was by myself. And the room that I was in was blue. Just ultramarine blue. It was this little room, with a table and a little bed and a chair, and that was it. And so when I came home, I made that painting. I made sketches, and I made that painting. That was instead of making a painting of Machu Picchu, I made a painting of this table with all my travel items, my clothes, and stuff like that. And so that is the name of that is Blue Hostal. In Spanish, hostel is Hostal, Cusco, and yeah, that is in the Wiseman collection, the Frederick Wiseman collection. Have any of you ever heard of Marshall Wiseman?
That house in Beverly Hills?
Pardon me?
Is it that house in Beverly Hills?
Well, Marshall Wiseman died about 30 years ago now, but she was Norton Simon's sister, and I know you know Norton Simon because of the museum. And Marcia was an art collector, and she was this little tiny thing, smaller than me, and she helped start MoCA. She was one of the founders of Museum of Contemporary Art downtown, and she took a liking to me. I don't know. I met her through my gallery, and anyway, she bought that big blue painting and put it in her living room. And then when she died, her collection had to be dispersed. Her ex-husband's wife was running the Frederick Wiseman Foundation. They're at Pepperdine. They're headquartered up at Pepperdine. They bought it from Marcia's collection, so it didn't end up in a dumpster somewhere. So anyway, that's where it is. And Marcia was, they don't make them like her, but she was really, like I said, a little tiny thing. It was just positively a powerhouse. And yeah. Yeah, sure.
Oh, well, I see so many urban landscapes here from like airplane view.
Yes.
Is that just out of your imagination, or do you use some
Yes.
photographs or pictures?
I never use photographs. I've never used photographs ever. I either make sketches. Well, I make hundreds, I've got thousands of sketches and drawings, and for me, painting is not, obviously I'm not a realist. My work veers very much toward abstraction. So I make sketches, but it's really, when I work, I don't know where the painting's gonna go. I don't know, I don't wanna know. But the landscape of LA, my first LA painting was like 1981 or 82. I was living downtown in what today I always laugh is called the Arts District. I don't know if any of you have driven through the Arts District. They've got signs up. Of course, there are no artists there today, But we were there in the 70s and 80s because it was like really cheap. You'd get a loft and it would be like 5 cents a square foot or something. Today, most of the artists are gone. But I was living right next to, just on the east edge of, right downtown. And so I could see the buildings out my second floor window. And my LA experience goes back to being a little kid, because my grandparents lived downtown at 3rd and Bixel, which is right on the west side of downtown. And my grandpa was a butcher at Grand Central Market. And my older brother and I spent a lot of weekends with our grandparents. And I remember when City Hall was the only tall building downtown. My grandma called it the Pointy Building. And she'd take us, Grandpa would be working, she'd take us down, and we'd go eat at Clifton's cafeteria, and we'd get our little treat. And so my relationship with LA and with the landscape of LA goes way back, and with downtown LA goes back to when I was, 3 years old. And I've watched it change, and I love this city. It's infuriating. We all know that. Yes.
Where do you live now?
I live in Ocean Park in Santa Monica. Ocean Park is the Santa Monica neighborhood just on the northern edge of Venice. And I'm like 5 blocks from the ocean, and I've been there 36 years. When I was downtown, I was in several different lofts, but I ended up in one building with a friend, and it was at 7th and Alameda, and the landlord, the owners came to us, and these 2 brothers, I remember these guys, they were characters, a couple of Israeli brothers, and they came to us and said, "We don't want to own this place anymore, do you want to buy it?" We were like, "Buy it?" Like, well, maybe, I don't know, it never occurred to us. And how much? And I think we paid $120,000 for it. I think, maybe, I can't remember, so many years ago. And so I went to my dad and I said, "Dad, I need some money for a down payment." And it was $5,000. Yeah, here, And then we sold it, we owned it. She and her boyfriend lived in one half, I lived in it, and we rented out the bottom. And, I'd been downtown 11 years, and she wanted to go back to Chicago, and so we sold it. And took that money, I made a little profit. I think we sold it for $350 or something. So I had a little bit of profit, and I went to my boyfriend, now husband. My brother lived in Ocean Park, and so I bought a beat-up little house in Ocean Park in 1986. It was super cheap. I don't remember what I paid, $300 maybe, I don't know. And then my husband and I decided to get married, and then I was going to build like a garage studio in the front, and it turned into a house, so we built a house. My studio's on the top floor, and we have a rental house in the back, and been there, since 1986. Raised 2 kids in the house, and the kids grew up, studio's on the top. Kids grew up in my studio. My husband would go off to work, and the kids would hang out with me until they were in school. My daughter, I'd set up a little table for her, and let's see, is this? I don't know if we got through it. And then a few years later, I had our son, and that was a whole different story. I'm sorry, you guys are crazy, My daughter would have a little table, she'd be drawing and singing next to me, and, "Oh, Mommy," my son would be tearing around, like an out-of-control lunatic on his tricycle, crashing into things, and, anyway, I survived. Eventually he went off to school, but downtown was, I don't know, it was a rough place to live, it was pretty rough. And I was a bartender for a couple of years in Beverly Hills, so I did that so I could paint during the day and I could go work at night. I'd come home to this industrial street, at 3 o'clock in the morning, and it was, I don't know, it's the sort of thing if my daughter wanted to do it, I'd be screaming, "You can't do that." My mother was like, "Well, whatever,
Different times.
Well, yeah, I didn't tell my mother most of what I did, let me put it that way. Anybody else, any other thoughts or
Any other questions?
questions about painting or art or anything like that?
I have a question.
Sure.
So I think there was only one in the slideshow of some people, some
Yes.
portraits. But
Yes.
there's more in the book of some other
There
folks.
are.
So,
There
are
are.
you- so you're doing portraits, you're doing landscapes, abstracts, what?
Well, you know, I've always, I started drawing when I was a little kid, you know, that's the way artists, you know, I always say artists aren't created, artists are born, you know, and that's true for all the arts. You don't teach somebody to be a composer or a musician, you know. They're born with that passion and that capacity, it just has to be trained. And so I was always drawing, and then went to art, you know, and I always drew really well, you know, and my kids still, you know, will sit for me and I'll draw them, and my husband, and, you know, but
There's the one.
there, that's my
Sure,
husband.
sure.
Okay, this is my daughter and me in the studio, and the painting is like, I don't know, 7 feet wide, life size. And, I don't know, I know I've always drawn, I still draw, I make them sit for me, and I still draw people, but,
Dave,
Dave, my husband,
that's your husband, and
Yeah.
Chris.
and Chris is my son,
They're
Yeah.
such great.
yeah, my son, yeah. You know, whenever I see somebody with a little boy, you know, I say, just wait. Just wait, you know. My son is 6'2.5" or something, and, you know, just, he picks me up. Like this morning, when I was getting ready to come out to Pasadena, he like came up behind me and picked me up, you know, it's like, hi honey, you know. Good morning.
So any last questions? Any last comments, anything, remarks you'd like to share before?
I'll just say one thing, going back to the Stephen Sondheim musicals that I saw recently. To me, I mean, art is something different for everybody, and for younger generations than me, art has become much more cerebral and political, and, you know, I don't know if you go to galleries or museums, but, you know, for me, art and music and always comes back to beauty and an experience of beauty. I love jazz. I've always loved jazz. Ever since my next door neighbor took me to Shelley's Manhole, which was a club in Hollywood when I was about 17. I was like, Shelley Mann was a drummer, a jazz drummer. I was like, wow. And when I listened to jazz, you know, particularly like Bill Evans or John Coltrane, or, you know, it's just like, the beauty of it just washes over me, like it did at that Sondheim music. I was just like, oh my God. And to me, that's what I look for in art. I want that feeling of being immersed in something just transcendent, something that is not like anything else, you know. So anyway, I came up with a phrase for it. Just this morning, I wrote it down. I thought, that's so perfect. Immediate beauty. You heard that first.
It's the first public showing of Immediate.
Immediate beauty. So anyway.
So what's your favorite Sondheim musical? If you can choose one. I'm a big Sondheim fan.
Are you?
Yeah.
Have you been to any of these?
No, well, I'm in the Bay Area.
Oh, that's right.
Oh. But I have probably seen all of them multiple times.
Well, I love a little night music. I mean, just when they sing, Send in the Clouds, and I just discovered Sondheim by Sondheim.
Side by side by side.
Well, on Spotify,
Right, Sondheim.
he has 2 albums where he plays piano and sings his own songs. I mean, do you know about those?
Yeah, I do. He's not a great singer.
He's
right?
not.
But
He's not.
it's so interesting when
It's
he sings
Stephen
his own songs.
Sondheim.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I'm listening to him go, oh my God, that's Sondheim singing. I just discovered those. I've always listened to other people singing. So, I mean, it's like the way when I see a favorite painting of mine, or like I love Pete Mondrian. I don't know how much you know about art, but I think his greatest painting is that MoMA in New York called Broadway Boogie Woogie. And when I've been there, it's the first thing I do when I go to New York. I go to MoMA and I go make a beeline for Broadway Boogie Woogie. And I get up as close as they'll let me get, and I think, Pete Mondrian touched that with his brush, you know? And listening to Sondheim, I'm just like, my God, you know? And I'm sorry, no amount of AI or any of this BS, you know, I'm sorry, you know, sorry.
On that note,
On that note,
on that note, get the book and go listen to some Sondheim tonight, if you can.
Send in the Clowns.
Let's go into the woods.
Into the Woods, I'm seeing that in July.
My favorite show.
It's gonna be here at the Montana in July.
Well, tell me who's in it, and then I might
It's
come
not
down and see it.
Bernadette Peters.
Oh, well.
She's doing a separate.
I saw her in it on Broadway many years ago, in the 80s. So anyway, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you to our presenter, Karla Klarin. Our next program is actually in San Francisco, but it's also a virtual program. It's Monday, June 19th at 6 o'clock. That program, again, is in person and it's virtual. Benjamin Albritton, who is the rare books curator in the Department of Special Collections at Stanford Libraries, will be speaking. And that program is titled From Bookcase to Bender Room and Beyond, Approaching the Centennial of Rare Book Collecting at Stanford. So if you can make it to that on Zoom, or if you want to fly up to San Francisco to see it, we'd love to have you be part of that program. You can register for all of our programs at bccbooks.org/programs or in any of the emails that you might be getting from us. Thanks everyone for joining us. Have a great evening, and check out the book in the back if you're interested. I've got one for myself, one for the book club, and Karla will also sign it. So check out a book, and you can come look at mine if you like, and have a great night. Thank you.